You're tuned in to Upon Further Review with Phillip Jordan, a show with compelling conversations on local, SEC, and national sports stories. Connect with Phillip on social media at PJordanSEC. Now, the self-proclaimed Wiregrass Podfather, Phillip Jordan.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Friday edition of Upon Further Review. I'm your host, Phillip Jordan, in-studio host and producer of Does Football on 96.9 The Legend and Auburn writer for Last Word on college football. On today's edition of the show, we are going to look ahead to Sunday, Father's Day, when the Birmingham Stallions are looking to do something not many professional franchises have done. That's win 3 straight league titles. We'll break it all down with Luke Miller from the State of the Stallions podcast. Plus, I'm going to talk about Father's Day, that coming up this Sunday. You can check out Upon Further Review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you're on Apple Podcasts, please follow, rate, and review. Leave a review. I will read it on a future edition of the show. And if you leave just 4 stars, you are just a straight-up hater. You can watch the show on YouTube and Facebook just by searching Phillip Jordan Sports. Also, you can watch the show on the Wiregrass Daily News Facebook page. Remember, you can email me at sportstalkphillipjordan@gmail.com, and you can follow me on social media at PJordanSEC. The Birmingham Stallions are attempting to do something that is a rare feat in professional football, and that is winning 3 consecutive league championships. The Stallions won the 2022 and 2023 USFL league titles, and last week they clinched a spot in the UFL Championship by winning the USFL Conference Championship against the Michigan Panthers. And joining me to break this down is a guy that knows all things Birmingham Stallions, Luke Miller, the host of the State of the Stallions podcast. Luke, I appreciate you coming on the show today.
Yeah, absolutely. Always happy to be here.
Yeah, it's fun, man. You know, we did on another show I was doing. We did a preview, and it feels like just yesterday, like it was last week. We did this. The season was kicking off. We were wondering how they would look against Arlington, the XFL versus USFL champions, and we saw how Arlington's season went. But man, this season flown by. I mean, I can't believe we're here. I can't believe we're here championship weekend.
Yeah, it's hard to believe. I think there was a lot of anticipation and build up for this first UFL season with the merger of the XFL and the USFL. And then, finally we kind of got the news of how it was going to work and when it was going to kick off. And then late March, it finally happened. And then you blink and here we are, last game of the season. Then it's over. It's in the history books. So it is hard to believe it's upon us here.
Yeah, and it's kind of one of these seasons with Birmingham. They were a dominant team. They kind of seemed like after St. Louis struggled a little bit with Houston, lost to the Brahmas team that they're going to play now, and then Michigan 2 weeks in a row. That was kind of just a weird deal watching the same 2 matchups on both sides, both with the XFL too. But I think a big talking point around the Stallions right now is quarterback. Adrian Martinez, the league MVP. How often do you have these conversations around a league MVP quarterback? Which Skip has announced he will start on Sunday. But is that the right decision going back to Adrian Martinez, or would you be more like let's ride that hot hand in Matt Corral?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think, in my personal opinion, I probably would like to see Corral get some more playing time in this game, especially the way that he played in the playoffs and the way that Adrian has struggled for several weeks now. That being said, I'm a little bit indifferent about who starts because, I think there's a case to be made that you don't want to be too sort of, too reactive to the last couple of weeks and say, well, Adrian hasn't had a couple good games. Matt looked good in limited time last week. Let's just throw Matt back out there. In Adrian's defense, again, like you said, he's the league MVP. He's had several fantastic games before a little bit of a struggling kind of stretch here at the end of the season. So, he's put together a really nice body of work, and you don't want to just turn your back on that just because of, again, a couple, maybe rougher weeks. But that being said, I also think that you don't want to stubbornly just stick with the guy because he kind of got you here and because he's the league MVP. I mean, if he's not able to get the job done, then I think Skip needs to be willing to quickly turn to Corral to see what he can do, because again, this one's for all the marbles, and you don't want to. Again, I do think at some point you want to kind of ride the hot hand when that becomes necessary. So, I think I wasn't totally surprised to hear that Adrian's going to go ahead and start, but my assumption is that he's going to have a pretty short leash this week. And, if he maybe throws an interception or kind of struggles to get the offense going early, I think it's, pretty likely that we could see Corral come in under those circumstances, potentially, Skip, I think, said himself, he said Adrian's going to start, but I don't know who the quarterback will be on the third or fourth series of the game. So my guess is we'll see Adrian the first maybe 2 series, probably for sure. And depending on how those 2 series go, it could be Corral's time by the third or fourth series of the game.
Yeah, and people out there wondering, on the season, thrown for over 1,700 yards, 15 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, led the league in rushing at 528. I did not have that on my bingo card going into the year that a quarterback would lead the league in rushing, 3 touchdowns on the ground. And obviously anybody that's watched the broadcast on TV, you've seen Skip Holtz getting on to Adrian, not seeing the field, and it seems like I'm not going to use the word regress, but he's just not seeing things maybe the way he was seeing them before. What have you seen in the last couple of weeks with Adrian Martinez that you kind of say kind of leads to these struggles?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I would say, like you mentioned, was his running ability, which really was huge for a large portion of the season, and kind of really, helped kind of in a lot of ways, the Stallions offense kind of was what it was because of his legs. It seems to have lost that. And I don't know if it's, defenses have really kind of tried to take that away, or if he's become more reluctant to run, or if it's some combination of the two, or whatever the case may be. But he has not had the same success escaping pressure, getting outside the pocket, and creating with his legs over the last couple of weeks that I felt like he had previously. So everything's kind of fallen on his arm. And in that realm, to me, it seems like in the last couple of weeks, again, compared to, middle of the season, he hasn't quite been as crisp in his decision making or as accurate in his throwing. It felt like a couple weeks ago when his legs were, kind of working a little bit more seamlessly in the offense, and he was kind of in a better rhythm, that was opening things up in the passing game, and he seemed very accurate and was making good decisions, good throws. But there's just been a couple head scratching plays. I think about just 2 kind of similar examples. In that week 9 loss to San Antonio, we had a situation where it was a 3rd and 4, and Deion Kane had a one-on-one kind of go route on the outside, and he launched it to Deion. And, I guess if Deion makes the catch, in hindsight, we maybe would having a different conversation right now, but they didn't complete it. They were sort of out of sync. And at the time, I kind of scratched my head because I'm like, it just seems like the way the offense was struggling that game, like the best thing we could do there is just get the first down, just get 4 yards. Let's keep the drive alive. And I was like, I don't know if that was a decision from Adrian, if that was something that Skip called, it's hard to say. But then fast forward to this past weekend in the playoff game, the Stallions were lucky to only be down by a touchdown going into half. And they come out in the second half, and first offensive play, Adrian does the same thing where he just, chucks it 50 yards downfield to Deion and underthrows him and gets intercepted. And when he comes off to the sideline, Skip is like, what are you doing? Like, this is not our offense. This is not how it works. Like, you need to trust the system, trust the process. And so I think those are just a couple examples where I don't know if it's because he feels like he hasn't been able to create with his legs. He's kind of trying to force more things with his arm. He's trying to make bigger plays happen with kind of these big passes down the field, but they're not necessarily there. He's not really taking what the defense is giving him. It just seems like just kind of out of sync, out of rhythm. Again, kind of some questionable decisions and questionable throws at different points. And even in his conversations with Skip, it just doesn't seem like they've been on the same page the last couple of weeks. And that just has led to him not having the same level of production that we saw out of him in the middle of the year.
And I'll say this in defense of Adrian Martinez. I don't think in the last couple of weeks the Stallions receivers have done their quarterbacks in his favor. Even with Matt Corral, I mean, he comes in there, tip pass, interception. I know it was thrown behind, but I'm sorry, Luke, at this level, the ball hits your hands. If it hits both hands, you should catch the ball. This is the way I feel about it. So the receivers also kind of have to do a little bit better.
No, I agree. I think especially at the end of the regular season and in that first half of that playoff game, there was a lot of blame to go around. I mean, I didn't think the offensive line blocked amazing. I mean, Adrian was under a lot of pressure that first time they played San Antonio. He was under pressure against Michigan, so, and sometimes Michigan and San Antonio, both of them are only bringing 3 or 4 guys and getting pressure. And so I think the offensive line needs to play better. Like you said, I thought there's a few times where the receivers had catchable passes and for one reason or another didn't come up with the play. And Skip, I've even heard him say, I need our receivers to make more contested catches and make more big plays. So I think you're right, it's not just Adrian that struggled over the last couple of weeks offensively. I mean, really, there's a lot of room for improvement across the board. Stallions have not run the ball well the last couple of weeks like they were at the beginning of the year and kind of in the middle of the season. So it's kind of one of those things where I think the dominoes start to fall and one part of the system sort of kind of breaks down and then the whole thing sort of suffers and nothing has looked amazing. So I think Adrian certainly needs to improve in this championship game and kind of prove that he is the MVP. But part of that is, the offensive line giving him time to make those plays, the running backs helping to create things and give the offense some balance, the receivers coming up with catches, and again, being on the same page with Adrian. So the offense as a whole, I think the last couple of weeks has, outside of, again, maybe the second half there of last week's game, has not really looked like the offense we've come to expect from the Stallions over the last couple of years.
Of course, they go to Matt Corral. I mentioned he had the interception on the tip pass, but 9 of 11, 120, 2 touchdowns in there. And he made the routine throws. He just took what defense gave him. He was not forcing the ball down the field as we saw Adrian. Oh, what kind of things did you see differently out of Matt Corral when he came into the game against Michigan?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head there with his decision making. I mean, he had a couple passes that were tight windows and some great throws. I mean, for the most part, they worked out in his favor. But the majority of his passes and even his touchdown passes and stuff like that, I mean, they weren't these kind of crazy, earth-shattering plays that he made. It was, checking it down to the guy that was open and letting that guy get in the end zone. I mean, both his touchdown passes were relatively short completions, but he just got the ball to the open guy and let them kind of do the rest. And I think the Stallions, with the offensive playmakers they have, like we said, those guys can step up and make some more plays. But at the end of the day, they do have some really good playmakers on offense, both in the backfield, tight end, receiver. And so, it's not complicated. If you can kind of get those guys the ball in space and kind of let them do their thing, they'll make plays. And so I thought Matt did a great job of getting the ball out of his hand quickly. I mean, that was one thing, is you didn't see him just standing back there, waiting, and then getting sacked or getting pressured or running for his life. I mean, I felt like he was decisive. He got the ball out of his hand quick. He got it to the open guy. Again, even if it wasn't a huge play, he got it to the open guy and let them kind of create things. And because of that sort of way that he was kind of getting into a rhythm, I just felt like the whole offense started to kind of click a little bit better. And the running game seemed to open up a little bit more. It just kind of seemed like a little bit more of a well-oiled machine with the way that he was kind of getting the ball out of his hand back there, compared to when Adrian was in the first half.
On the defense side of the ball, obviously we've seen changes there in the last couple of weeks. John Chavis no longer with the team as defense coordinator. I know when Corey Chamberlain was first being shown on the sideline, look, I was like, okay, I'm a big fan of alt leagues. I've been watching these. I was like, I know that guy from somewhere. And I finally clicked with me. Oh, that's the guy. He was head coach, Saskatchewan Roughriders. He's got a Grey Cup. And I think that is actually, I know that his time in Saskatchewan didn't end probably the way, obviously the way he wanted. Still, you got a head coach that's won a championship on your staff. And it feels like Birmingham the last 2 weeks against Michigan, it feels like I'm watching last year's defense, like it's the bend but don't break. They were really dominant earlier on in the season. What kind of things have you seen with this defense since kind of like that change?
Yeah, I mean, I think at first there was a lot of turbulence and the defense kind of struggled, which, to some extent I think is to be expected when you lose your defensive coordinator and play caller who's been there since the Stallions came back in 2022. But Chamberlain, certainly is a great coach. Like you said, he's been a head coach before. He's won a championship as a head coach before in the CFL. So there's no doubt that he can coach. He knows football. And, despite some of the struggles that the defense had at first under sort of his charge, the one thing I will say that they've consistently been good at is they've made some fantastic in-game adjustments. if you go back and look statistically, pretty much every game that he's called, at least going back to the San Antonio game, the defense has really been lights out in the second half. I mean, this past game, they didn't give up a single point in the second half. The game prior, I think they gave up, I think the 2 games prior, they gave up, I think it was 9 points total, a field goal in that week 10 game and a touchdown in the week 9 game. And in that week 9 touchdown should have only been a field goal. The drive got kept alive because of a kind of a silly, unnecessary roughness penalty that gave San Antonio a second chance to get in the end zone. Otherwise, they were going to have to kick a field goal on 4th down. So if that had been a field goal, he would have only had 6 points total at the most. If they missed a field goal, it's only 3 points, but we'll say 6 points at the most given up over the past 3 second halves of the past 3 games. So the way that he's been able to kind of adjust in game, kind of figure out what the other team is doing and adapt to it and put the defense in position to succeed has been very impressive. I think the hardest thing is the Stallions just haven't gone off to a lot of fast starts on defense. They seem to struggle to kind of settle in early, and they give up a touchdown or, maybe a couple of field goals early in the game. And because the offense hasn't really been clicking, it's led to them kind of getting a little bit behind early on. I will say I felt like this past week they were better about that. I mean, they did give up a lot of points in the first half, 18, but a lot of that was they kind of kept getting put in a bad spot, just with turnovers and things like that. So you can't blame them too much for that. And honestly, I think they deserve a lot of credit for, Michigan could have easily had 30 or more points at halftime, the way that first half went. And they, like you said, it was kind of the bend but don't break. Like they got either put in a compromise situation or they gave up a lot of yards and found themselves, getting close to the red zone. But then they really kind of buckled down there and were able to limit Michigan to several field goals, which ended up being sufficient. Once the second half, the offense kind of got going. So I think if they can continue to build on that and continue to kind of, hopefully feel more comfortable with Chamberlain's play calling and, just kind of the way the defense is kind of working with him in charge, then hopefully they can not only have, a great second half in this championship, but also get out to a good start early and kind of trying to contain San Antonio from the get-go rather than having to just kind of make those adjustments in game, I think would be the hope.
Yeah, I felt like first half they were at midfield every possession when they were on defense. And let's be honest, with Michigan, when you get to midfield, they're in scoring range with their kicker.
Yeah,
Jake Bates,
sure.
You're pretty much already in scoring range. So just holding them to field goals is almost like holding them with no points because just the leg that guy has. I'm excited to see what he does in the National Football League. Oh, of course, they're playing the Brahmas in the championship. I think this is the surprise. I think a lot of people are assuming it was going to be Birmingham versus St. Louis once again, but obviously A.J. McCarron was hampered with the injury.
Right.
That was obvious over these last few weeks, but they played in week 9. And then San Antonio, 18-9, snapped the long winning streak for the Stallions. What was the big thing coming from that game? Why were they able to only hold Birmingham to 9 points and get away with that victory in San Antonio?
Yeah, I think San Antonio deserves a lot of credit. They're a great team, and they specifically have a great defense. I think probably you could make a pretty good case. It's been the best defense in the league this year, and it's led by obviously a fantastic defensive-minded coach in Wade Phillips. And so they've got a really, I think, stout front seven. Like I mentioned earlier, there was several times they were able to get pressure on Martinez in that game without really having to bring many guys, only bringing 3 or 4 and still getting pressure or getting sacks. And so that obviously really hurts an offense when you kind of get behind the chains like that. And then they have some, I think, really athletic linebackers who tackle really well in the open field, can move really well. And then they also have some great secondary players too. They really, I think, there's no glaring weaknesses on their defense. And so I think the way that they were able to both pressure Martinez as well as contain him when he did get out of the pocket. He didn't have, a massive amount of rushing yards that game or anything like that. So, I think that was big. Another thing I think that was huge was, and some of this was self-inflicted by the Stallions, but they did a great job stopping the run. I think they did such a good job at it that unfortunately, I think Skip went away from it pretty early. And he said that after the game, he regretted not trying to be more committed to establishing the run. But I think at the end of that game, Ricky Person and CJ Marable, our running backs, only had I think 7 carries total between the two of them. And again, part of that was the play calling, but also I think part of that was the fact that the running game wasn't having a lot of success. And I think Skip kind of felt forced into going to the passing game. And so they made Birmingham, I think, very one-dimensional, which, is not, no offense typically ever really wants to be that. And so I thought they did a great job. I mean, the Stallions lined up in their kind of famous T-bone formation to get I think it was a 4th and 1 in that game.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was the first time all season that they didn't convert, didn't get the yard or two or whatever they needed. So, so that just kind of tells you, they're how stout they are up front and their ability to tackle in the open field and that sort of thing. So, forcing the offense to be one-dimensional, then kind of pinning their ears back and getting pressure on Adrian, making him uncomfortable, and playing good coverage in sort of the back end in the secondary. I felt like it was a good recipe for really slowing down the Stallions offense and limiting them to that's their worst offensive performance, not just this season, but in their entire history since coming back in 2022. I mean, they've never been held to 3 points at halftime, and they've never, up until that game, and they've never been held to single digits in points in a game until that game. So, there was a couple things about it that won't carry over into this game. For example, the Stallions technically, I don't like using the term meaningless game or something like that, because all these games I think are meaningful to these guys. But the Stallions had already secured home field playoff kind of advantage at that point. So they didn't have any sort of external motivators to kind of be playing for, whereas San Antonio did. They were kind of in the hunt with St. Louis for a home playoff game. So they really needed a win to kind of potentially secure that. Didn't end up securing it, but to potentially secure it. And, and also I think San Antonio obviously had the chip on their shoulder of, the Birmingham hasn't lost all year. This is our chance to knock them off. And it was a home game for them. I was actually at that game, and credit to the San Antonio crowd. They were really into it. They got really loud, especially at the end of the game. And it's a dome. So, it plays kind of, the sound kind of amplifies. And so a lot of those factors, I think, also played into the Stallions just not kind of being in sync. And those things won't necessarily carry over to this championship game, right? Where you have a neutral site game, it's a championship game. Everybody's going to be playing their best football, you assume. But that being said, the Brahmas, again, like I said, still deserve a lot of credit, because I thought they did have a good recipe for success in terms of slowing down the Stallions.
Yeah, you talk about that game, 16 yards rushing just by the running backs, because I know if you look at just at the number, it's actually a halfway decent number, but Martinez has 56 of those yards rushing in that game.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at, and really, I've said this going to the playoffs, I feel like Michigan and San Antonio are very similar.
Yeah.
Played multiple quarterbacks in a year. We know they want to run the football and play defense. Defensive-minded head coach, a lot of similars. I think San Antonio is better than Michigan, but still a similar deal. And then last week, they really leaned in on their running game against St. Louis with Anthony McFarland, John Lovett, 115 for McFarland, 83 for Lovett. I just feel like, get your thoughts, if Birmingham can stop that running attack of the Brahmas, I just don't feel like Chase Garbers is the guy that could go win you a game on his arm alone.
No, I agree. I mean, Garbers deserves a lot of credit for the way he's played this year. But I think a lot of his success is, I think, a combination of the system that he plays in, as well as the playmakers that he has. So if you go back and look at, at least the games against the Stallions in week 9 or last week in their playoff game, a lot of their touchdowns are big plays, but they're not, a 50-yard pass down the field. It's Garbers throws a screen to McFarland, and McFarland makes 2 guys miss and ends up taking it, what should have been maybe a 5 or 10-yard gain, turns it into a 60-yard touchdown, right? Or, I think there was a play last week where he hit Justin Smith. He makes the cornerback miss and man-to-man, ends up taking it to the house for a touchdown. John Trey Kirkland is also a really good receiver. So they've got some really good playmakers, especially in space, and they have a good offensive coordinator who does a good job dialing up plays to get the ball to those guys in space and maybe take advantage of some weaknesses or soft spots in the defense. And so I think Garbers is very much kind of like sort of a point guard whose job is really to get the ball out quick to these guys, again, in space, and let them kind of do their thing. And he's done a good job of that. And he deserves credit for that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. The question is, if it kind of came down to it and the whole thing was on his shoulders and he had to really sort of be the one to kind of make it happen, could he do it? And, I guess it remains to be seen what the answer to that question is, but I feel much better about the Stallions being in a situation where they're really trying to force Garbers to beat them with his arm, moving the ball down the field, than a situation where they're getting to really run their offense and let McFarland just kind of get the ball in space, either handing the ball off to him or throwing it, dumping it off to him out of the backfield or something like that, and kind of dinking and dunking their way down the field until the dam kind of breaks and somebody gets loose, for a big play or something like that. So I do think the Stallions' number one job defensively is to just stop McFarland and say, okay, if you're going to beat us, it's not going to be because he ran all over us. And if you're going to beat us, it's going to be because Garbers, just went off with his arm. I think that's a bet that you'd probably rather take than letting McFarland be the one who beats you, because we've all seen what he can do, and he might be the most dynamic offensive player in the league. So I don't think you want to leave it in his hands. You certainly would rather have it in Garber's.
And finally, and I feel like a big take or a big thing for me for Birmingham to come out on top of this one is a fast start, because they started slow against San Antonio in week 9. They were down 16-6 week 10 at Michigan, 18-3 last week in a playoff game against Michigan. So I feel like a fast start is a key factor for Birmingham. What's one more big factor for Birmingham to come out with a win on Sunday and be UFL champions?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think a fast start certainly goes a long way, because that's something they haven't had. I think the other thing I would say, honestly, is to play smart and play disciplined. If you go back and watch the tape in that week 9 game, there was just a lot of unnecessary penalties and kind of mistakes that took a close game where it was really kind of grinding it out, and the Stallions just kind of shot themselves in the foot over and over again and made it even harder on themselves. And I personally think the Stallions are the better team. Granted, they lost the first time these two teams played, but looking at their full body of work, their roster, coaches, past history, et cetera, I think the Stallions are the better team, but I think it's very close. I think San Antonio is a fantastic team, and certainly, obviously, you've already done it once. They have what it takes to beat the Stallions, depending on how the game shakes out. So, given how close these teams are in terms of their talent and the success they've had this year, I think the Stallions obviously don't want to do the Brahmas any favors, and that's in a lot of ways what they did when they played them in week 9. I already mentioned the Kenny Robinson unnecessary roughness. It was a 3rd and like 25 or something like that, and they break the pass up. He kind of throws an elbow at the end of the play. They call him for a 15-yard penalty, and there was some debate of if it was ticky-tacky or not. But either way, it's like just don't go there, and you avoid that debate. And but that personal foul gives them an automatic first down. So again, instead of kicking a field goal and it being a 6-point game, now they get to go down and score a touchdown and make it a 9-point game. There was an offensive personal foul on one of our offensive linemen who had a great block, flat backed a guy, but then he kind of celebrated, taunted the guy, gets flagged for a 15-yard, unsportsmanlike, and that kind of ends up killing the drive, and so. And there's several other examples of things like that throughout that week 9 game. And I think you could even look at the last 2 games the Stallions have played. And to some extent, that's kind of carried over into those last 2 games. I feel like the Stallions have had sort of an uncharacteristic amount of kind of silly penalties, kind of backbreaking penalties over the past couple games, as well as, the Stallions offense had a lot more turnovers last week. It didn't end up, it didn't end up kind of ruining them in the end because the defense forced so many turnovers. So they kind of looked out there. But, I think those things, right? Like the penalties, the turnovers, the not getting off the field on 3rd and long, that kind of stuff where it's like, if you want to beat a really good team, you can't shoot yourself in the foot over and over again and expect to come out with the win. So I think the Stallions, obviously they've won 10 games this year. They know how to get the job done. But they're playing a really good team, and I think they don't need to make it any harder on themselves than it's already going to be to pull out the victory against the Brahmas.
Yeah, it's going to be fun this Sunday on Father's Day. So get with Dad and watch a good football game. That's what's especially on the son side. If you're, that's what fathers and sons do. We watch football. But anyways, look, I appreciate you coming on, breaking this game down a little bit longer than we had planned, but it's a great conversation as always. Let the listeners know where they can find you, also the viewers as well, and the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So, on lots of different social media platforms, pretty much anywhere, if you just search State of the Stallions, you can find me on X, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, YouTube. The podcast is on YouTube. So, if you search State of the Stallions there, you should be able to find it. Also, I've got it on Spotify, Apple, kind of those common streaming platforms. So, if you prefer to listen to your podcast there, just search State of the Stallions and it should come up.
All right, everybody, go check it out. Go check it out. And I'm sure after the Birmingham Stallions win another championship, you're going to need to hear Luke's thoughts. But Luke, I appreciate the time, and thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
96.9 The Legend is your connection to classic country legends. But Digio Strategies has other options too. News Talk 103.9 is your source for America's top news and entertainment shows, like Rick and Bubba in the morning, Glenn Beck from 9 till 11 a.m., and Clay Travis and Buck Sexton middays from 11 a.m. till 2 p.m. Sean Hannity, Lars Larson, Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, and others fill your day with the latest news and views from America's top conservative voices. America at Night and Coast to Coast AM keep you company and connected throughout the night. Plus, Fox News, the Alabama Radio Network, and Wiregrass Daily News keep you informed with national, international, state, and local news. And with more musical choices like All the Hits 106.7 KMX, Today's Country 95.5 WTVY, and Music 107.7, Digio Strategies gives you more choices and more variety. Listen on air, online, and on our apps. 96.9 The Legend is just the beginning.
All right. Once again, thanks to Luke Miller for coming on the show. A lot of fun talking all things Stallions with him. My prediction for the game, I think the Stallions will win 27-20. Close game, but the Stallions will win another championship. So this weekend is Father's Day on Sunday. And I wanted to just talk about Father's Day, my experiences with both my dad and my stepfather in a sports-related field, but also I wanted to get some thoughts. I kind of just it's only got like 3 responses to this on social media. We do this from time to time. I want to get your thoughts. Let you become part of the show. And so basically threw it out there. What are some memories, Father's Day, it could be sports related that you have that you would like to share? And this is what we had over on Facebook. Brandon Eisman going to Baton Rouge for LSU versus Troy in 2017, first game ever in Tiger Stadium. That was when I believe that Troy beat LSU when it was LSU's homecoming. My good friend AZ Bugs going to see Bama play for the first time with my dad. That's always a great experience. And then Cherish Moore. I don't have a favorite, but when I was little, we had a pool, and he would always do the washing machine. And my little brother and I thought it was the funniest thing. Now, as adults, we've made a new Father's Day tradition of going kayaking down the river with my daddy and my father-in-law each Father's Day weekend. The whole family looks forward to it. So that is what we had there on that. So kayaking and football games and stuff like that. As Father's Day, and for me, I'm going to tell 2 stories, and it's kind of like it's all related. And this may be one of 5 times I open up this door to let you know a little bit more what I grew up with, rooting for, stuff like that. My 16th birthday, so 21 years ago, my dad did everything, and he succeeded possible at getting us Auburn tickets to see Auburn versus LSU. Nick Saban was coaching LSU at the time. Auburn was having an up and down season. This was 2002, excuse me. Jason Campbell was a sophomore. Bob Petrino was offensive coordinator for Auburn. And LSU's top 10, like I said, Auburn having a tough year, and he got tickets. It was a great experience. And Auburn won that one 31-7. I still remember that. That was just a great time there. And I mean, my dad did a lot of stuff like that. He went to a few games together, and he's a big reason why I'm doing this, why I like sports, why I'm talking about this stuff as much as I do. He passed away in 2013. It really was between the weeks of the miracle Jordan Hare with the tip pass against Georgia, and then the kick 6. He was a big Auburn fan, and miss him deeply. And that was the big thing with him. Auburn football, that was our big connection. Now, my stepfather. So this kind of ties into the following spring in 2014. Probably, during that football season before my dad had got sick, before he passed, we had talked about going to the Auburn spring game together. That was conversations that we had, but that didn't happen. And my stepfather, who was an Alabama fan, went to the Auburn spring game with me to see it. So that's something that I've always cherished and appreciated. He's not an Auburn fan, but he went and did that anyways. It really, really means a lot for him to do that. So that's kind of like some memories I had. And there's plenty of other memories with both and everything else. But that's kind of like my Father's Day thoughts on that. And that's going to do it for the show today. We'll be back on Monday. Big episode on Monday morning. I will be joined by the voice of the Auburn Tigers, Andy Burcham. I've already recorded the conversation. We go about a good 30 minutes. We talk the upcoming season for Auburn football, but we will also jump into his career there at Auburn, a long, illustrious career there for Andy Burcham. So that is what to expect on Monday's podcast. Really excited for you to hear that conversation. Anyways, I hope everybody has a great weekend. Spend time with your dad. All the dads out there, happy Father's Day, and I will talk to you on Monday. Till next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to Upon Further Review with Phillip Jordan. Listen to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Watch the show on the Phillip Jordan Sports Facebook and YouTube pages, or the Wiregrass Daily News Facebook page. Got a guest idea? Email Phillip at sportstalkphillipjordan@gmail.com. Join us next time for Upon Further Review.